Yeah, this portion of the program will be recorded, and the Palestine Museum US reserve the right to use that recording with social media and publish it on such venues as the museum's YouTube channel. Anybody that is not in agreement with that are welcome to exit this program. If you continue to participate, you hereby accept the terms we just described. Thank you. And we have a couple of hands raised. Let's see. Lynn, I'm letting you talk here. What?
Yeah, I just wanted the chat restored. That was Gilad Atzman that was doing the music. That long time no here. That was cool.
All right, thank you. We will be
Thanks, Lynn.
the chat on in a minute here.
And is the film available to many people that I know would value seeing it?
We would have to rescreen the film to see it. We can publish the recording of the discussion, but not the film. We cannot record the film and publish it again. Now we would have that would have to be rescreened, and we may screen it in the future depending on how much requests we get for that.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Maybe he could also join us by phone if his.
Yeah, I'll give him a minute to see if he can, if he's able to join normally. And Nadia, let's see. Nadia, you have something you want to say?
What I thought was so interesting is that all of these historical documents that he was showing.
Hold on. Let me bring you on as a panelist. Let's see.
And just to introduce our recorded part, so we've just watched the screening of Palestine, the reality, Arthur Balfour, and the document that destroyed the Middle East from director Karl Sabbagh, who will be joining us shortly for the post-film discussion. Thanks everyone for tuning in today to the Palestine Museum US.
So Nadia, please turn your video on and unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So
tell us who you are, where you are, and what your thoughts are.
Okay, I'm Nadia, and I'm in Bethesda, Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. One of the things that struck me from the very beginning of Karl giving this history is that all of these official documents and even documents written by the Zionists talk about Palestine, the state of Palestine. And yet, so much of the discourse today, if you read the comments in the Washington Post and New York Times, people are always saying, there was no Palestine. There never was a Palestine. You know, that's ridiculous that they want to have a state. And it's kind of like time for a history lesson. Like, there it is in official documents. It's amazing how all of this has been glossed over, and Israel really wants us to ignore history. I mean, it just makes me feel like we need to provide copies of these documents to the people that are ruling our countries, you know, so they can get a wake-up call. That was one of the biggest things that struck me.
Excellent.
No, it's a great point, Nadia. I mean, you saw the way Karl brought in quotes from so many leaders in government who, we're just.
But even the Zionists who wanted to create the country knew that there was a Palestine.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I guess what's ironic is even today, where there's this, like you said, even today, there's this sense of there's no such thing as Palestine, there's no such thing as Palestinians, and yet they're talking about transferring Palestinians out of Palestine, but they don't really exist, right? Anyway, Karl, so glad that you're able to join us.
Karl,
Thanks for coming back.
Some people from the audience join. We have one more to join, and then we'll turn it over to you. Let's just say
those Israeli IT specialists are very clever.
Hello, Nabil. Thanks for joining us.
Hey guys, how are you?
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Good, good. Before I forget, say quickly, Krista, call me afterwards because Peter Beinart is coming to town March 10th and 11th. So I want to see.
Okay, I will do so.
I'll talk to you later. Just to go back to Nadia's point, to be honest with you, I'm sick and tired of trying to prove to people that there was a Palestine before. And, Nadia, I'm with you 1,000,000%. I'm just saying, just out of frustration. But when people tell me this, when people say this, it's coming to the point that I'm saying, well, there was no India when Christopher Columbus came here. And there was no Australia when the British went there. There was no New Zealanders, the Maoris. And the point that I'm trying to say is, even with that stupid claim that there's no Palestinian, even if there, I'm just saying even, I'm not saying there isn't, there were people here. There are people that were living and breathing, just like native Indians were, just like Aborigines, just like the Maoris, just like, South Africans, and on, right? So my point is, even if they want to go down that rabbit hole, it's like, what's your point? It's just there is just nothing land called Palestine. What's your point? There were people here. So that line of BS that there was no land called Palestine doesn't justify you come here and just occupy it because people were living whatever. I'm just saying this out of frustration because I hear this all the time, and it's becoming such a stupid argument that usually intelligent people, even on the Zionist side, won't even use that anymore. Usually. But you still have a lot of the, walking zombies, walking around every day because they've read Zionism 101, right? That's what they keep saying. Anyway, I'm just saying venting out of frustration because I'm so sick and tired trying to prove to people that there was something called Palestine. It doesn't, anyway.
All right. Thank you.
Big thing. It's not a.
I hear your frustration, Nabil.
Karl, the prior person who joined the panel when you weren't on pointed the fact that everything in the film indicated, based on the documents that were presented, that there was Palestine because they were all referring to Palestine in almost in every document that was presented there.
Yes, I don't think. I mean, no, I sense Nabil's frustration, but I mean, nobody would argue that there wasn't an area of the Middle East called Palestine. I think the point that people are trying to make, which is not a valid one, is that there wasn't a nation, with a head and an administration and so on, in the way that perhaps there was in other parts of the world. But that's neither here nor there. There were all sorts of places which had territories and names after the First World War, which had been part of the Ottoman Empire, which gained their independence and their governments and their leaders. You had Iraq, you had Syria, you had Transjordan, which was separated, and each of them, was created as an independent nation in a way that Palestine wasn't, in spite of all the promises and the Hussein-McMahon agreement. So,
All right. For
Karl,
the audience, if
ahead.
anyone would like to join us at the panel and come ask questions or tell us what they think, please raise your hands and we'll bring you on the panel. Thank you. Go ahead, Krista.
Karl, I was just going to ask you, your film really does an excellent job of showing the racism and the misrepresentation of Palestine that took place at the time of the Balfour Declaration. And we witnessed the same kind of language and misrepresentation of Palestine today. Can you just talk about the consistency of that practice and why is that so persistent and so successfully persistent in misrepresenting not only the people of Palestine but the place called Palestine?
Well, yes, there are two separate questions. I mean, it's persistent because it's always been a central pillar of Zionism that they were entitled. One of the reasons they were entitled to take over another land was that there weren't people there, that there wasn't a nation, and this has translated into that there weren't Palestinians, as Golda Meir says. And the more you can delegitimize the people who are Palestinians today, the more you can somehow con the public into thinking that that Israel has done no harm by founding a Jewish state. The reason it's successful is that, well, as we know, the hold that Zionism and Israel and its supporters has over anybody who attempts to criticize them. A combination of reminding people all the time of the Holocaust. We Palestinians are always being told not to not to focus on history all the time, but to look ahead. And yet, of course, Jews and Israel are continually concentrating on history because they're using the Holocaust as the justification. My next film, which you may want to show at some time later in the year, is going into this point, and it's looking at ways in which Israel and its supporters have concealed so many aspects of the truth about their treatment of Palestine and about their use of the Holocaust and so on. I think that the reason I wanted to make this particular film, it wasn't just that it was the anniversary. It was because it is the phrase, the Balfour Declaration. I mean, I think even Palestinians don't really realize what a fragile foundation there was for this letter. And the phrase is always bandied around as if it was some huge treaty that, the weight of which Palestinians had to overcome or counteract if they were going to justify their state. And what I wanted to show was that it was a Zionist document written by Zionists and using the British as a conduit to, to the rest of the world, when in fact it has a very flimsy basis and indeed contradicted proper agreements that the British had made already. So I think it's still worth telling that story today, even though it all happened 100 years ago, because it's just another of the many pieces of misinformation that Israel and its supporters use when trying to justify their takeover of Palestinian land. And I do think, I don't think we can just say, well, time has passed and things have moved on, and we have to look to the future. Whenever it suits Israel, they will continually go back to their history, and I think the Palestinians have to go back to their history as well, and the history of their treatment by the British and the Zionists.
Couldn't agree more.
We have one of the audience with us, Stefania Sani. Please tell us who you are, where you are, and your thoughts.
Hello, Stefania.
Hello, Krista, and thank you, Karl. I have a question about a little later, and I don't know if this is pertinent, but in the 40, when actually and you correct me, Karl, when the Israeli turned against the British, and so the United Nations had to become involved in the creation of the state of Israel and so on and so forth. What was the reaction of the British government at that point? And again, I don't know if that is pertinent to this discussion.
Yes. I mean, it's a very good question, because in fact that turning against the British was a key event that led to 1948, that led to the UN partition vote, and of course the thing is that the British government was not a unitary organization from 1917 to 1948. By the time you got to 1946-47, you had a Labour government, you had a government which had just been all the way through the Second World War, and you had Ernest Bevin as Foreign Secretary, who just wanted to wash his hands of the whole thing, particularly in the light of the publicity that Jewish terrorism directed against the British was, the headlines it was leading to in Britain. So, I mean, it's a sign that, the Israelis or the Zionists will turn on anyone if they feel they've no longer got the support. The point was that their extreme demands that Zionism placed were too much particularly for the new British government, which had wrestled, the older one. I mean, all through the 1930s, the British had wrestled with trying to find a solution which favoured Zionism, but that didn't somehow put them in a totally bad light when it came to the promises they'd made to the Arabs. And they couldn't cut the Gordian knot. There was a white paper at the end of the 1930s, which first raised the issue of partition. But partition was something which divided the Zionist movement itself. There were some Jews who just wanted the whole of Palestine. In fact, all of them wanted the whole of Palestine, but some saw that if you accepted partition rather than being totally unreasonable with the British suggestion, that you could then use it as a base to take over the whole land, which is in fact what happened. But I mean, so the British were finally realizing towards the late 1930s how, some of them had been taken in by Zionism, not all, and that's when they started cutting back on immigration because they saw the harm it was causing. But that was just too much for the Zionist movement, which turned against them. And then when the Labour government came along as well, that was the point at which, irresponsibly, I think, they gave up and they said, well, I'm sorry, we can't put up with our soldiers being murdered by the Jews and all the terrorism that's happening. We're just going to abandon the place. So, I mean, that was not a particularly honorable thing to do either, but that's why it happened. Because in the end, the Zionists wanted 100%, and even the British just tried to give them 80%, let's say, and that just wasn't enough. So they washed their hands. So had the British, I mean, I'm not saying there was another solution other than really facing up to the Zionists, which Britain never wanted to do. But I mean, had they not just immediately, or not immediately, had they not withdrawn from Palestine and left a vacuum, there might have been a different outcome.
All right, thank you. Again, members of the audience, if you would like to join us at the panel here, please raise your hand. We do have some person here. Let me see if I can bring them up.
Well, Karl, you really make the point of how the ethnic cleansing aspect of the Zionist agenda is really integral from the get-go, and we see how that remains a central tenet of Zionism and the reconfiguration of Palestine into Israel. So I really appreciate you making that point, that is not something new. It's not a solution in response to something, but it is part of the program from the beginning. And appreciating the consistency of Zionism is really important, I think.
But I genuinely believe that a different Palestine could have been constructed during the 20s and 30s based on the fact that until militant Zionism came along, Arabs and Jews in Palestine got on. My family had Jewish friends. There were towns which had both Jewish and Arab populations. There was it was the influx, the too fast influx of European Jews who had no interest in mixing with the population.
Of course.
I mean, Arthur Koestler made a very good point. I mean, he was a Zionist, but he made the point about Tel Aviv that, Tel Aviv was a Jewish city built on European lines with sort of Bauhaus style architecture, and people who had no interest in the Middle Eastern culture, who didn't, take on the lessons of Arab architecture, the stone houses, the coolness, the way in which people lived in the other towns, they were determined to install their Europeanness in a Middle Eastern state rather than genuinely become part of that state. But another sort of Jew, another sort of Jewish organization could have had room in Palestine for Jews who genuinely wanted to live in that sort of state. Instead of which, I think a lot of the European Jews were sort of deceived into thinking that they were going out to a state which would be a bit like a European city, but hotter, and not realizing the extent to which it was an Arab country.
Thank you,
Well,
Karl.
and that was,
We have a new
yeah, go ahead.
person. Kirsten, would you like to turn your video on? And if not, you can just speak if you prefer not to have the video, but it'd be nice if we could see you. It's too dark.
I hide something with my camera. I keep closing it.
That's all
and
right.
I don't remember how to fix it.
It's fine. You can just talk. Tell us who you are and where you are and
Yeah, I'm Kirsten. I'm 76 and I live in Sweden. I've been following what's going on in Palestine, especially Gaza, for like 20 years or so now. And I wonder, there are these two stories, the Israeli story or the Jewish story and the Palestine story. And do you think, I've been thinking a lot about that, where could the people meet? Because somehow to see that they're just humans, we're all humans. And is there a possibility to bring it to people, listen to each other's story, so that they can at least acknowledge the stories even, and then adjust it to the facts, the historical facts? Because I have problems with understanding how can there be peace as long as these stories are so firmly different. I don't know. It's a big problem, and I'm thinking a lot about that.
Well, I mean, there's one simple explanation in that one story is true and the other is false. So there isn't really either a way or indeed any point in trying to encourage Palestinians to believe the false story of Zionism. And you certainly won't get Israelis who are brainwashed to believe the true story of Palestine because it's so shocking and would, you know, put them in such a bad light. This is the trouble. I mean, I'm interested in the extent to which modern Israelis who only live in Israel and who only read, you know, right-wing newspapers have a totally false view, not just of the history, but of what's going on now. I mean, I'm sure, well, I've heard that many of them really don't know the truth about what their own government has done to 44,000 Palestinians in Gaza, or indeed don't know the truth about the, if you like, the social mix in Gaza, the extent to which, I mean, you know, many Israelis genuinely believe that every Arab in Gaza is a terrorist. I mean, I read somebody the other day quoting, saying that every, you know, even elderly women in Gaza are the parents of future Hamas members and therefore deserve to be killed. I mean, the picture that Israelis are given of their own history and of the current situation is so far from the truth. Whereas, you know, Palestinians have, I mean, their history is embodied in their families and their ancestors and the maps of the villages that they hold and the keys that they hold and so on. That's not, nobody has persuaded them that there was an injustice. They know there was an injustice. So I don't think that, I think, I mean, to say something positive, I think there is value in getting Palestinians and Jews or Palestinians and Israelis together. But the main value is to reveal to the Israelis how they've been lied to for for generations themselves, not to get the, each side to believe a little bit more about the other.
May I just say something to that?
Sure.
Because I know there are, for example, groups of people in Israel with Palestinians and Israeli people, Jews and Arabs, who talk together about the way they have lost children in these
Yes.
wars or these attacks, and they can meet in the morning of the grieving, and they have started to listen to one another. And of course I know there is a true story, and I read a lot about that. But when I say listen to one another's story, I think what I mean is to understand why they act the way they do, especially the Jews, why they do act the way they do, because they have this imaginary history. And if they could meet there somewhere and that veil of lies could be taken away eventually, it
Yes.
would take
Yes.
time.
No, I think I think it's certainly true that the personal tragedies of individual Jews and Palestinians, that there have been situations in which the two groups have met and sympathized with each other and realized, the suffering that has gone on. But none of that addresses the justice of the case. And I don't think, I mean, okay, as an Israeli who's lost a child, you can genuinely and justly, I don't know, hate, dislike the person who killed your child, just as the opposite is the case. But I don't think that, the fact that Israelis have suffered from Palestinian attacks is an argument for saying, therefore, Palestinians don't deserve a state of their own. I mean, it's a huge leap. I think that sort of thing that you're talking about could, in a future state, or indeed in a single democratic state, which I have been a supporter of for some time, that sort of thing, if such a state existed, would then be a way of melding together the two populations and of sharing, what they have been through to arrive at this point. But that wouldn't really address, wouldn't really make Palestinians somehow believe that Israelis were justified in taking over their state.
Thank you, Karl. We have a few more people, so we want to try to get as many people through as possible. And we have Diala. Could you turn yeah, you're on. Please tell us who you are, where you are, and what you like to say. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Faisal, Krista, Karl, thank you for letting me speak. I am in Montreal. I teach modern Arab history at the University of Montreal. Karl, thank you so much for this very important, engaging film that does a wonderful job in showing the interplay between decisions made by politicians, lobbyists, documents, but also personalities behind those actions.
Thank you.
I was just and you also show up to a point how there is a discrepancy between the government in England and the administration, the British administration of the mandate in Palestine. This is true at all times, of course, from the beginning of the mandate until the end. What I was wondering about was why, since the film is about such an important document as the Balfour Declaration, you did not maybe focus on that critical moment when the Balfour Declaration becomes a part of the official document of the British mandate, which means that even though, of course, the Zionist movement celebrates massively when this letter is sent to Rothschild, the Zionists movement knows this is only a piece of paper, as you well show. It is just a letter, and a letter without even a letterhead, and it only becomes meaningful politically, legally, once it is integrated into the British the League of Nations,
the League of Nations mandate.
The League of Nations document mandating
Yes.
the government of Palestine to the British, and this only happens in 1922. So even in 1920, at the San Remo conference in Italy, when the mandates over Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine and Iraq are carved out of the Ottoman Empire and given to France and Britain, the Balfour Declaration is still only a letter. And it will be integrated in 1922 into the famous League of Nations document in the preamble and in the Article 2 of that famous document. This is when it becomes, a legal and politically dangerous document. And the Palestinians know, of course, of its dangers and fight it continuously between 1917 and 1922 and way beyond. So that was my first question to you. If I may be allowed to also comment on something else, I was wondering also why, because it shows the extent of this structural, permanent exclusion of Palestinians, why the film did not maybe dwell a bit more on the 1937 crazy partition plan, which is happening as Palestinians are fighting in the so important uprising and revolt of revolution. There's so many different names given by different historians to that crucial moment in Palestinian history between 1936 and 1939, where they are en masse revolting against the Zionists and the British mandate. So I was just wondering why there was not more focus given. Contextualizing the partition plan, the Peel partition plan of 1937, within that revolt by Palestinians. And I know that your film, I think, is dated from 2017, if I'm not mistaken. A couple of years later, Lila Parsons, a historian of the British mandate over Palestine, actually, published those two very important articles, sorry, in the Palestine Journal, showing after new documents came to light the secret testimony to the Peel Commission. It's in two parts. One comes out in 2019, the other in 2020, and it shows how Palestinians were completely actually trapped because everything was happening behind the scenes, and they refused. They wanted their testimonies to be public, but the Zionists were pulling the strings and testifying secretly before that before that commission, which was about to produce that crazy first partition plan. Anyway, sorry for being long, but I was.
No, if I can answer the second point first. That whole era, that whole interaction between, the Palestinian delegation that came to London, and Francis Newton was one of the people. Jeffries himself was one of the people helping them. The way they were treated by the British. All of that's a whole separate episode, and it wasn't directly part of the story of the Balfour Declaration. So that that would need another film to tell. It's a very interesting story. But to take your first point, yes, indeed. I thought of including the fact that it was only when that letter became or the terms of that letter became incorporated in the League of Nations mandate that it acquired. Well, you could say that it acquired legal significance. The fact is, it was treated from the moment it was written as if it had legal significance. And I think that was the point. from the time the letter was published, it was promoted not just by the Zionists, but by the British, as if it was the formula for the way ahead. So it would have, as far as the film was concerned, it just would have added another layer of complexity, I think. But I mean, the point that Jeffries makes, and you will know this, is that in fact, the British, until the mandate was ratified, the British had no authority to run Palestine anyway, and yet they did. I mean, they started their administration before they were legally allowed to. But you know that didn't matter to them. They were determined to treat the Balfour Declaration from the beginning as if it was their legal charter. So, but you're absolutely right. It didn't get incorporated, and how it got incorporated, obviously, into the League of Nations mandate was with yet more, you know, pressure from Weizmann and the other Zionists on the British to incorporate it in a way that was entirely inappropriate. But no, it's a very valid point.
Thank you. We have another person with us here, Dina Sarsour.
It's Surur, I think.
Sorry, my eyesight isn't very good. Dina, you want to start your video? And it looks like
Hello.
Yeah, start your video, please. And
Oh, okay, just a moment.
sure. All right.
Is the video on?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Tell us who you are and where you are from. And
Oh yeah, I'm calling in from Massachusetts. Thank you for screening the video and making the documentary. I was just curious if the filmmaker or the panelists had any input. Our state several months ago created an anti-Semitism commission. It's comprised of Jewish people. I heard their latest meeting online. We have the Massachusetts Teachers Association attempting to teach a more balanced and complete history of Palestine and introducing historical points about Palestine. And of course, the commission doesn't like that. The way they speak, they are introducing the usual Hasbara talking points. It's hard to tell if they are just ignorant about the history or if they know better, but they are just trying to quash any counter narrative to the dominant one. And I don't really know as a layperson like how we address this or if there's any way to push back against it, because it's I mean, of course we are against true anti-Semitism and Jew hatred, but it's also hard to tell, was the commission, you know, assembled to combat true anti-Semitism, or was it commissioned like to prevent a more complete story about Palestinian history from being told in the schools?
I mean, my feeling is that the anti-Semitism, accusations of anti-Semitism are used as a reflex, really, by supporters of Israel whenever there is any criticism of Israel. So, you know, the more bodies that can be so, it's like we have a so-called charity in the UK, which is, I can't remember its title, but its brief is to allegedly to monitor anti-Semitism in the UK, but in fact, its true actions are to seize on criticisms of Israel and paint them as anti-Semitic, and because of the fear that people who don't know much about the situation have of being labelled as anti-Semite, these are quite effective. So it sounds to me as if that's what's going on in your country, and you just have to use use truth and justice as a weapon to counteract it. You know, I certainly don't think. I mean, I think if people were less worried about being accused of anti-Semites by being confident of the facts they were putting forward, we might make better headway. But it's a shame that you're having to deal with this sort of thing.
All right. I think we have another person on, Elisa Davinka. I'm gonna allow you to speak if you like. And could you unmute yourself? Sorry, I lost you. There we go. You are muted. Please go ahead, and if you like to turn your video on, go ahead. But you can speak if you can go ahead now. Eliza.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes. My name is Iftach. Actually, do you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. Are you able to turn your video on so we can see you?
I'm not in a place that I can use my camera. So
That's fine. Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah. Actually, so thank you, Karl, for the film. I would like to say one thing. I mean, for me, that I'm speaking from Tel Aviv, by the way. My name is Iftach. And for me, the Balfour Declaration, the main issue here is the imperialistic issue. I mean, one country which dominant, after the First World War, they take the region with the French, defeated the enemies, and they split the area sites before. And this nation, the British, promised this land to another nation, which is actually the source of everything. So I would like to mention this, like 1917, which is a prominent turn point, I would say, with Balfour Declaration. Also, the Faisal promise, from Saudi Arabia, I mean, to this group of people or family, Faisal, to promise Iraq or to promise Saudi is actually also the imperialist motivation, you know what I mean? Like, without democracy, without the people from Saudi or Iraq, just to give it to a family or to a leader and to his promise, which not kept by the British. But anyway, this is the imperialist approach. And 1947, it's another point in this, that the division, I mean, the agreement of separation, how do you call it in English? The division of 1947, I mean. Do you hear me?
Yes. Sorry, what do you mean the partition plan?
The partition, it's another imperialist. I mean, without asking the people, without asking not the Jews, not the Arabs, dictate from the UN. I mean, this is another kind of imperialist. And actually, if I come today, Trump now, 1.5 million in Gaza, he decides, transfer Egypt, Jordan, without asking the Palestinian people nothing, without, this is the same approach to this area of the Middle East. And for me, the Balfour Declaration, actually, the main point here is the imperialism, which we are still living under this condition. We are still suffer from this in different angles, it was one with the British, and now it's with the American after the Second World War.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. And indeed, back in 1917, which I haven't gone into any detail, but one of the reasons that Weizmann persuaded the British to support the Balfour Declaration was because it would help their imperialist aims, both in terms of controlling through the Jewish inhabitants that key place on the globe between India, another part of the British Empire. It might have given them control of the Suez Canal, or at least been near it, and indeed, the whole business of the Weizmann persuaded the British that they would get Jewish support for their war aims if they issued the Balfour Declaration. So, you know, big politics was all wrapped up in it in various ways, which I haven't gone into. And as you say, later on, the imposing of kings and princes on different countries, dishing them out, dishing Iraq and Syria and Transjordan out to members of one family. I mean, it was typical imperialist behavior, but I didn't go into that, but you're absolutely right to point it out.
All right, thank you. All right, we're kind of coming close to the 2 o'clock time here. Any other people, please raise your hand if you'd like to join us as a panelist.
I'm just looking at the comments. There's almost a sort of parallel dialogue going on here, which
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, there are points which I might have been able to answer, but I don't think, you know, we can do everything. Although perhaps there's a way of me answering them later if I have access to the comments. I mean,
well, there was interest expressed to screen the film again. So earlier in the chat, quite a few comments about wanting to see the film again or recommend it to others. So
and we can do that. We can arrange another screening, so that's not a problem.
I mean, one idea I had, I haven't given you any warning of this, Faisal, but I'm very encouraged by the reception that this couple of films have got. And I am working on another one, which I hope you might be interested in sharing as well. But also, I mean, I'm doing this in a sort of vacuum. I'm addressing issues which I think are important. But I mean, at some point, maybe the people who watch regularly would like to suggest questions which they would like answered, or things that puzzle them, that a short film, you know, another short film or a series of short films could address and then be used with a wider public. I mean, I throw that idea out there because, you know, it's work that I enjoy, and if they actually get appreciated, then I'm very pleased about it.
So we can.
Well, you're welcome to ask people to put that in the chat.
We can solicit some input from people in the next email that we send out.
Anyway, I'm well on the way with my next film. So once that's finished, we can discuss whether you want to do a screening of that. But certainly, if you want to do another one,
of course,
of the Balfour one, then I'd be happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had 260 households watch the film out of maybe 300 to 360. So there was another 100 people signed up but did not participate. So plus some of the people watching the film today are going to invite friends of theirs to watch the film, and they're going to share it with a lot of their contacts. That will generate more people who want to see the film. So plus I think some people want to see it again.
Well, there is a lot in it.
Yeah. And honestly, you know, the film that we showed before from you, Palestine as It Was, is only 18 minutes. So conceivably, we could show both of them and have another conversation with you about both films, because they are certainly related.
Well, I may
in
run,
terms
I may
of,
run out
history and present tense. Yeah.
Well, I may run out of things to say, but anyway, let's test that hypothesis.
I don't think so.
Okay. Right.
Well, I really appreciate, Karl, your comment and in the film and in the discussion about the fact that history could have unfolded differently, and regardless of that it didn't yet, it still can. And certainly, as you said, the sudden immigration of Jews to Palestine from Europe certainly upset the balance that existed in Palestine, in this very vibrant, multicultural, diverse society that existed then. and actually continues to exist, except now under apartheid. And so I think in that sense, you offer some hope for what could be in the future. And I think that is what makes the history so relevant to consider at this point in time.
Krista, I haven't been watching the chat very closely, but nobody has really seemed to discuss the feature in the film at the end where Karl is presenting an alternate Balfour Declaration, which
that was a wonderful inclusion.
I mean that's very interesting. Basically, that points the way to a potential solution to the Palestine question, as some people refer to it, and opens some ideas for how the war could be stopped, how the occupation and the apartheid could be ended, and creating one democratic state with equal rights for everybody. I mean, that's the only feasible solution at this point. None of the other solutions that have been attempted are going to work. Certainly not force, not violence.
Well, then I think in that case, I think people should also read my book, A Modest Proposal, which is exactly describing how a single state could work, and I think overcoming many of the obstacles that people have raised. I mean, I've been rather less. I haven't talked about that so much at the moment because the current situation is, so far away from that. Barely can anybody get a sensible conversation about a two-state solution. So the idea of a single state, but in principle, and the issues that it raises, I think are very important as an indication of what might have been, and B, a way forward into what could be, with obviously a very different Israeli government.
I thought it was interesting that there was some suggestions at the time of the Balfour Declaration of sending the Palestinians to Egypt and possibly to Damascus.
Yes, it's very similar to Trump's plan.
Kind of a premonition of the Trump.
I know, no,
exactly.
No kidding.
100 years ago.
Yeah. No, that interests me seeing it again.
He's reopening old books, basically.
Yeah.
Karl, some people are asking if they wanted to arrange for their own screening or for their university to purchase your film. How would they get in touch with you for that?
Well, I mean, I'd be very happy for them to do so. It seems to me that the museum, has got more of a mechanism that could do that.
We can arrange for that. People who are interested, please contact us through info@palestinemuseum.us, and then we can arrange for you to do a screening or whatever you want to do with the film.
Yeah. I think that would be best. I mean, I'm sure you can certainly get in touch with me anyway through, Faisal will give you my email or whatever. But I mean, I think in terms of future screenings, and I'd be very happy for them to happen. I think it's best done through the museum.
And we're happy to do that. Just contact us.
Excellent. I put that email address in the chat in case you're interested in reaching out to the museum to arrange for its screening.
Yeah. All right, sounds good. We have a snowstorm imminent right now, so we want to wrap up. So I want to thank everyone, particularly Karl Sabbagh, for the film that he created, and also for joining us today and spending his time with us. Thank you, Krista, for co-hosting and for your warm greetings to the audience at the beginning. And thanks to people who joined us at the panel and those who joined us on Zoom today. The best way to keep up with Palestinian history and with what's going on. And we look forward to seeing people next week. Actually, tomorrow we have an important Madafa session, which is a book event. And there's a book of a literary book by Palestinian authors in the diaspora that was published by Palestine Rights Palestine Rights is a literary festival that takes place from time to time. And we will have an opportunity to listen to a number of authors read from their books, which should be quite interesting. So hopefully some of you will join us tomorrow for that event, same time, same channel, like they used to say. And
I put that link to register for tomorrow's Madafa in the chat.
I'll give people a minute to click on the link so they can have it, and before we close the session here. All right,
Thank you again, Karl, for joining us and for sharing your work with us. And we look forward to your next film.
Okay.
And our future conversations with you.
Well, thank you for expanding the viewership of it. I'm very pleased with the reactions anyway.
Thanks everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Masalam, everyone.